I'm not going to take a lot of time to intro because I got a lot of material to go through, but if you could do this, if you could pull your notes out, and you say, well, I don't take notes. You should, and in this series, you really need to, because there's going to be a lot that I'm going to show you, and if you're here today, and I know there are people here today because I asked that everybody would invite people who did not believe in God to come today. And when I ask that of the body, they respond and they ask, and people come with them. So I know there are people here that you just don't believe there's a God at all. And maybe you've had that discussion with who you're sitting with right now, and you've had that debate, and you just don't know if what they were saying is true. Well, I'm going to show you a perspective. One, I'm going to give you an atheist perspective. Then I'm going to give you the scientific perspective. And then I'm going to give you a biblical perspective today. But I want to start out by just welcoming all those that are here. You know, the first 4 words of the Bible, you really can't go any further until you reconcile what you believe about the first 4 words of the Bible. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. And you have to ask yourself, you really can't make any other decision in life until you believe whether there's a God or there's not a God. And everything in your life is going to flow out of that belief, whether you believe there's a God or you don't believe there's a God. So God has a plan. Hebrews 3:4 says this, "For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything." And so I'm going to ask that you pray for me as I go through this and share this series, because if you're a believer and you believe there's a God, you may say, well, I just believe there's a God. My daughter is on the team that did all of the graphic design and everything in slides, and I said after she saw the sermon, I said, did it cause you to believe more that there's God? She goes, Dad, I believe there's a God. And I think Christians think just Sunday morning is about just me. Right? We don't realize that this is really about doing the work of the kingdom, which is reaching people with the good news. That's what our calling is. That's what our purpose is in life. And the reality is you've been brought up just to believe there's a God. Maybe you don't know why until you hit a tragedy in life and you begin to question, someone dies early, or you lose your job, or you financially go through hard time, and then you start to question, is there a God? Just believing there's a God is going to often be tested, and ask Job, it's going to be tested when you go through hard times, and you're like, if you're a good God, where are you? Right? You have to believe there is a God, and I believe that it takes more faith to believe there isn't a God than there is a God. So pray for me as we go through this. Father, right now, we just come to you. We believe you exist. There are those in this room that don't believe you exist, and so even what we're doing seems trivial to them. But Lord, I pray you to reveal yourself. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, the conflict that we're in right now is between man's truth and God's truth. Man's truth and God's truth. The problem with man's truth is that there's over 7 billion people on the planet. And there's variety of truths out there. In fact, one morning I woke up, came out my front door a few years ago, and my neighbor was sitting there drinking coffee, and she said, I just want you to know that there is a bright light that shines over your house. I think there is. It's the street lights right there. She knows, oh, no, I'm spirit. I believe in the spirit realm. And I said, oh, you do? And she had written a book. She's a famous author. I didn't know it, of cosmic belief, if you're into that thing. And she had written all these books. And she said, over your house is this good spirit of light. And I said, well, it's good to know. It's called the Holy Spirit, though. It's got a name. And she goes, well, what do you mean? And then I tried to explain it, and she's very nice, but she had her own belief. and she was trying to get people to follow. See, that's man's truth. It's just based on man and whatever they think it is. God's truth, and what I said is really a truth revealed to man in the Bible, but also before the Bible was revealed through men to us. And many people will say, well, how can you believe a book that was written by men the same way you believe textbooks that were written by men and women? You don't question who they are or where they came from or what they were. You give credibility to the same scientific textbooks that you read and you believe in, and you have no question of that. And yet we question the Bible and we say, and yet it's the most ancient book in the history of mankind. You say, no, there's a book in India that was actually older than the Bible. No, that's not true. Job, because the Bible is a collection of books, Job is the oldest book in the history of mankind. It's a collection of books. The Bible is a collection of books. And the reality is people want to throw it out even though it's the most owned, most historical, incredible book we have in history, and people just want to throw it out. It needs to be part of the conversation because of the value, the credibility that it holds. And people but most Americans especially just think it's a spiritual book. If you don't believe it's a spiritual book, then it's a historical book to you, and it has credibility because it's been proven to be true. You have to make it part of the conversation. We have to make it part of that conversation. So there's this battle between man's truth and God's truth, religion versus existence. Sam Harris wrote a book called The End of Faith, Religion, Terror, and the Future Reason. And by the way, this is going to be a different message than pretty much any series I have. That's why you need to take notes. But in his book, he said that the reason people are leaving religion is not because they don't believe in God. It's because religion is dangerous. And before World War I and II, and some would even argue that they have a little bit of that, 9/11 for certainly was a cause of a war. Religion has been a beginning, or what's caused the number of wars, whether it's 9/11 and they wanted to kill infidels, and they claim Muslims. So we threw everybody in with them that's what Muslims want to do, is kill Americans, because that group of Al-Qaeda wanted to do that, right? And then there was the Holy Wars, where Christians went and killed people across Africa, and they all in the name of God went to kill. Now, how many would say you're all about killing people who don't convert? And yet they claim to be Christians, and you say, well, they're not Christians, but we have a hard time turning that around, right? So the reality is religion has driven a number of the wars. It's the reality, but that's never been God's plan, right? So people have just said, I'm not a part of organized religion. And God never came for us to be part of that. But here's the problem. Because you'll hear people say this statement, why do you always bring your religion into the argument? Right? You'll hear people say that. Why do you got to bring because religion is worldview. It's how you view the world. Everybody brings their religion into it because everyone has a belief system. Religion is defined worldview. It's how you view everything. So when you hear a politician say, well, I'm this, but I will not bring my worldview into your... That's just stupid, because you're going to do what you believe is true. And if you don't, why would we want you there? Right? You're going to do what so your religion is really your worldview. It's how you view the world and what's shaping that worldview. So when people say that, it's just ignorance. Because if you believe there's a God, then you're going to view everything through the lens that there is a God. And if you don't believe there's a God, you're going to view everything through a lens that God can't ever be the answer. God will never be the answer of your interpretation of science if you don't believe He exists. And if it's your religion, you are so adamant that there is no God, you won't allow science to point to Him because He just doesn't exist. In the same respect, people who believe there's a God will not let science point that there isn't a God because they're just convinced that He exists, and I refuse to let anything change my mind. And that's who we are as people. Right? How many are saying that's the reality? And I wanted to be a lawyer before I became a pastor. That's what I wanted to do. And one of the things I used to always love in a movie when I was in high school, it said, we should always let the truth, if it's true, it will always find its way out. Right? If it's true, it will always find its way out. And so I want to, if you're here today and you don't believe in God, I want to kind of show you why I think it takes more faith to believe there is no God than to believe that there is a God. But I got to get my notes back because I just deleted them. So 1 second here. There they are. Praise the Lord. Charles Darwin, who is the father of evolution, made this statement, and it's on the screen. You may want to take a picture of it. You can get this online as well. The impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe with our conscious selves arose through chance seems to me the chief argument for the existence of God. But whether this is an argument of real value, I've never been able to decide. Charles Darwin wanted to be a priest, and then he was kicked out of the church because of his study of science. And even because of that, how many know that how we're treated often has a lot to do with the way we view things, right? Now, I want to show you a verse. That's what Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, said. I just don't believe that there probably is a God, and they've put him up as the father of atheism as well. I don't know that Charles Darwin would say he was an atheist. I think he would say he was more agnostic. I'll explain the difference in a moment. But look at Romans chapter 1. It says this: the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people. Notice it's not people that he's releasing it on. It's the godlessness and the wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since that what may be known about God is plain to them because God made it plain to them. Now it's interesting because Richard Hawkins made a statement in a debate with John Lennox. And so you just put Hawkins Lennox into YouTube and you can find this. I encourage you to go and just kind of, this is really the primal pump of understanding why we believe what we believe. But Hawkins says, I understand. This is what he said. He said, I can understand why there's when you look at the complexity and the incredible nature of creation, all the things around us, the trees and the mountains and the sea, and you see it, I understand why there's something in you that feels like you want to believe there's a maker and you want to worship it. He goes, I understand that, but science has proven it's preposterous to believe it. See, this is an incredible thing to me, because in Romans 1 says, because what he identified is the very thing God put inside of you to understand his existence, to worship him because he's made. He said the desire of you to want to believe, there's a desire in every person to want to believe there is a maker, but science has shown there isn't. Now, you need to come next week, because next week I'm going to address that issue right there with what he said. But it goes on and it says this. He says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without an excuse, right? For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened, and although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Now this is interesting, because Hawkins makes a determination. He says every uneducated, ignorant individual in your church probably believes in miracles. That's what he said. Very arrogantly says, I'm smarter than everyone else. You're all dumb, right? If you believe there's a God. That's what you do when you don't have an argument, is you attack. When there's no argument, when John Lennox would make an argument against him, he would attack with stupidness. Why? Because it won't make sense. It's like this. In biology, I believe in the science of biology. It can proven. Biology says that when you come out of the womb with a certain appendage, you're a boy. And when you don't, you're a girl. But we live in a day and an age that wants to say that's not so. So you can't say science or law, there is no proof. So they attack you if you try to use science, right? By the way, and I know there's some, you're anti-abortion, or you're anti what's going on with abortion. Listen, if there wasn't a life in the womb, you wouldn't need an abortion. If you don't believe it's a life, then let it grow. Let's see what happens. If it's not a life, it won't grow. It just, science says but if we ignore science when we want to ignore it and use it only when we want to use it, it's insanity. It's exactly what it's saying there. They become fools, and you can't have an argument with a fool because a fool won't accept wisdom. Right? So if you don't believe there's a God and you're here today, please understand, if you truly want to believe there's a God, then listen. Otherwise, maybe you're in the category of and I'll show you in a moment, of someone who's just, it's not about believing the truth, it's what they want to believe. Okay? So religion is our worldview. Religion's our worldview. Well, how do you determine what religion is? In order to have a religion, how do you determine what your religion is? You got to answer 4 questions. You got to answer 4 questions. Here, the first one is origin. Origin is, how did I get here? Every argument, and every person says, I'm not religious, and they say, I'm not religious. Well, then how did we get here? Most people will have some idea in how they got here. Right? That's number 1 in origin. Here's the second thing that they ask is morality. How do I define what is good and evil, right and wrong, truth and a lie? How do I define that? How do I look at it and define it? Number 3, third question is meaning. Why am I here? What's really the purpose of my existence? Why are we here? Did this accidentally happen? And then the fourth one is destiny. What happens to me after I die? Now, what's interesting is Christianity answers all of 4 of those questions. Islam answers those questions. Hinduism, Buddhism, they all answer those questions with the answer. So does atheism. So when a person who says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in religion, you're really serving the religion of atheism, whose God is mathematics. It's mathematics. And what's interesting is, with mathematics, and this is they believe everything, because Bill Gates, who created, the Microsoft's whole system, said when you look at the DNA of a human being, it identifies a very complex designer, like far greater than any designer of any computer program. Like the human DNA is so complex, but it's designed just like digital programming in a program. He says it's a great programmer. That's Bill Gates who says that, right? Now, what they say is everything is about mathematics. The reality is mathematics is nothing more than a human attempt to organize what they see. Like, actual mathematics doesn't exist. We put numbers to the truth. They often forget, like, there isn't a 1 floating around in the world and a 0, right? Like, there's something there that we identify as 1. Like, when you were born, you were given a name. That's basically what mathematics is we give something a name, a value, a name, and it's a number. But they worship mathematics. I know I'm losing some of you. This is a lot like school. My wife said, 8:15 is a little early for that message when we were in the last service. Richard Dawkins wrote this in God Delusion. He said, if this book works as I intend, religious leaders who open it will be atheists when they put it down. His goal was to get converts. Don't tell me that's not a religion. Atheism is religion trying to get converts, and it ignores the facts they can't answer. And they want to claim, have you ever noticed that in most discussions about whether or not there's a God, they always put our beliefs that there is a God under the microscope, but they've never had to defend their own? So I'm going to bring up to you some of the beliefs that they have from their perspective, what they believe. Now, it's ignorant to insist that a Christian believer must leave the Bible behind in matters of ancient study, while they insist on using the works of modern thinkers, textbooks. Keep in mind, the Bible is the most historically credible and ancient book in history, and more people have read it and have it than any other book. It has been proven to correlate with history. You cannot leave the Bible. So if you're here and you don't believe in God and you say, I'm not going to allow the Bible, you have to. If you're going to have any intelligent discussion, you have to allow the Bible to be part of that discussion because it's got credibility, historical credibility. But the first thing I want to do is give an atheist perspective. If you're an atheist and you don't believe there's a God, most atheists don't even know what they have to believe in order to be an atheist. It's true. Like most Christians don't know what they believe. Most atheists don't also know what they believe. So I'm going to give you, we have tenets of faith in the church, 16 in the Assemblies of God that we hold to. But there are tenets of the atheist church, and I'm going to give them to you in a moment, and then you can decide. Richard Dawkins says this: what lies at the heart of every living thing is not a fire, warm breath, not a spark of life. It is information, words, and instructions. Think of it, a billion discrete digital characters, mathematics. If you want to understand life, think about technology. And then he brings up this whole idea of quantum cosmology, which is a bunch of theories based on theories based on theories that they then make this statement in. And he makes it a lot. Hawkins makes it a lot. He says this: we now know. You don't know. It's total faith. You'll hear people, credible scientists, saying, we now know. In fact, Mackenzie was watching on Apple TV a dinosaur thing, and they said this dinosaur used to eat stones. You don't know that just because you found stones by the fossils. But they make up a story, call it, it's a theory, and that's good, it's a theory. But in one of the articles that Zach gave me, in the article, the man in the article made this statement. He goes, whenever you hear of scientific theory, think of it as law because it's true. It's not true. It hasn't been proven. Next week, I'm going to show you the statistical likelihood of what happened. If you don't believe there's God, of the likelihood of that being a possibility. You got to hear it. It's incredible, right? But just because you found stones, you don't know that dinosaur ate stones. But people who love to tell stories come out and they create it and they say, this is likely. And then they make the statement, we now know. So I'm going to say that we now know God exists, right? I mean, the reality is theory is not law and law is not theory. Law can be proven scientific. Theory is just an idea. But here's something that's very interesting and is prevalent in atheistic thinking. Look at this. Thomas Nagel wrote a book, Mind and Cosmos, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwin Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. Now, you'll be tested on this later. He does not believe in God, but this is what he said. I want atheism to be true. And I am made uneasy by the fact of some of the most intelligent, well-informed people I know are religious believers. And on television, you hear it all the time. If you believe there's God, you're an idiot. It's constant. But the reality is, majority of people believe there's a God. Okay? It isn't right that I just don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. That is literally the mindset of many people studying. You got to understand, it doesn't matter what science points to. They just don't want it to be true. And so they do whatever they can to make it not so. But how many know you can't change the fact if there's a God, and there ain't anything you're going to do about it. Just because you don't want, and this is a credible scientist or philosopher, and Stephen Hawking says this, he was committed to a belief that there is no God regardless of what he discovered. Make no mistake, do not make a mistake of seeing the authors of atheism as scientists any more than you would see me as a scientist. They have created a series of theories that support their notions and beliefs that God does not exist. So can atheism even exist? The premise of atheism is that there is no God. What's interesting is the smartest human being alive is Christopher Langdon. He has the highest IQ there is of any human being. And they estimate, when you look at history and language and books and research, all people, all truth, that the smartest person on the planet knows only 1% of all knowledge. Only 1% of all knowledge. Now let's just say there's someone we haven't discovered in the depth of some world when you think of language and everything. And it was funny because my wife and I had a discussion over here. She goes, I wonder how much knowledge I know out of all of that. And I said, out of all language and history, she goes, that's about 30%. And that's not even close, okay? So think of this. Do you think maybe in 98% of all that you don't know that there could be a God? Right? Like to say there is no God assumes you know all things. Right? So what most people have come to is this idea. I'm agnostic. Agnostic says, I don't believe there's a God, but the possibility of God existing is there. So I don't know if he exists or not. And what we've labeled those people is the nones. The nones. They just don't, I don't know if there's a God or not. I don't know all things, so I don't know that they're God. 23% of all Americans believe they're nones. 38% of millennials are nones. 38% of millennials are at the place where they don't know if they believe there's a God or not. So let me help you a little with this if you're a none. Here are the tenets of atheism. Here's the first one. It's the illusion of the mind. This one is going to take a little bit of really kind of capturing it. Christopher Hitchens he had cancer. He was in the doctor. He's one of the writers and authors for atheism. He was in the doctor, and the doctor kept saying, your body is trying to fight off the cancer, and we want to strengthen the immune system to fight off your cancer. And that's what's happening, is your body's trying to find out. Eventually, at one point, he got so annoyed because that's not what he believes. He said this, he goes, I don't have a body, I am a body. Okay? Now, this is where many of you who believe your dog can talk to you and can reason like you, and they think, that's where subtly you have fallen into this thing that they want you to believe. Okay? And I'm sorry if I'm going to ruin your whole concept of your pet being part of the family. But that very thinking is an atheistic thinking. Okay? Now follow. This is what Christopher Hitchens believes. This is what an atheist. If you're an atheist, this is what you believe. You do not have a mind, will, or emotions. You don't have a soul. That if you came from the pool of amoeba that kind of evolved from one to another, you're nothing more than an animal that is driven by biological stimulus and chemistry. And essentially, every decision you make is not out of reason or thinking. It's just a response to the environment. So you, the soul that would go to heaven when you leave your body behind, when your body dies, you die. Your soul does not exist. You do not exist. Which is interesting, because if you're an atheist, the very aspect of the soul, the mind, to make up the argument against the existence of God, you're saying doesn't exist. Like, if you don't have a soul, then you can't even make an argument of why there is or not a God. And that's what you find is people trying to make it out. How many get this? You're getting it. Raise your hand if you get this. It'll keep you awake if nothing else. Right? So now here's the trap. This seems so common sense to you that you would believe you have a soul, that you're having a hard time understanding what I'm saying because you just can't think that that's possible. Right? Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, when I say you, I'm not talking about your body. I'm talking about that invisible part of you. I am not my body. There's something in me that goes to eternity. That's what I'm talking. That you does not exist if you're an atheist. Here's the second one. The illusion of free will. You do not have free will. You just do what your biology and chemistry causes you to do. You just do what you do because that's what you do. Christopher Hawking says this, everything about man is determined. It does not matter. There's nothing you can do about it. Later, then he says, I have noticed that even people who claim that everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it, looks before they cross the road. All right? The contradictions that people make, it's incredible. Now here's the third illusion of the tenet of an atheist, is the illusion of value. Nothing has value in life. It's meaningless. It's kind of like Solomon when he said everything is meaningless. An atheist believes that nothing has values. Your relationships don't have values. Your family, your purpose, there's no purpose. If you had a box full of values and you opened it up, there would be no values. All you are is matter. It's all you are is matter. Look at this. Richard Dawkins says this. Now follow this on the screen so you're getting this, okay? Because essentially what he's saying is, and it's true if you believe in evolution and atheism, is there is a big rock in the sky that exploded. Essentially, you're a rock. Now, I know you've called your mate at some point a bonehead because of something they did. But they really believe we're just a piece of rock. Look at what he says in this statement. Richard Dawkins says this. Think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gathered themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing, and eating other such animated chunks of complexity. Okay, you're sitting there thinking, I had to read it 4 times. So take a picture of it. What he's saying is, he's talking about you running and jumping. You're a rock. And then you eat animals that are rocks. Okay? Then he goes on and says, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling, which you can't if you're matter. If you're a rock, you can't think and feel. You don't have a soul. Falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. Later, he would say this, we now understand essentially how the trick is done. It's incredible. So here are the scientific, and I'm going to go through these quickly. Here are the scientific perspectives. Socrates said, we should follow the argument wherever it leads. So here are 6 scientific proofs of God's existence. Number 1, cause and effect. For every material effect we see, there's a cause that came before it or simultaneous to it that is greater than it. The universe is a material effect. Essentially, what came before that caused? If the Big Bang happened, and I don't believe it did, but if it did, what created it? There was a cause and effect. They say through physics, they prove that it came from nothing. The argument is, and it takes incredible faith to believe that it came from nothing. Here's the second scientific reason. Design demands a designer. Charles Darwin said, the impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe with our conscious selves arose from chance seems to be the chief argument of the existence of God. If you look at the fine detail of humans and their ability, you look at the universe through the Webb telescope, and you should look through the video they do with the Webb telescope. There is a digital eloquence, Francis Collins said, of this amazing creation that it was designed, that somehow they say out of an explosion it all fell in order, that it all fell in place. It's amazing to me that that's even a possibility, and I'll give you an illustration of that in a moment. Number 3, life demands a supernatural life giver. In this material natural world, life comes from previously existing life in its own. Here's the thing. I'm going to give you a law, not a theory. It's the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis says anything that has life has to come from a life-giving agent. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and life. Number 4, moral law demands a moral lawgiver. Who determines whether it's right or wrong? Put the quote up there from C.S. Lewis. He says, now this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. The idea was that just as all the bodies are governed by the law of gravitation and organism by biological laws, so the creature called man also had his laws, with this great difference, that a body could not choose whether it obeyed the law of gravitation or not, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or disobey it. But the most remarkable thing is this. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right and wrong, you will find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he'll be complaining it's not fair. Why? Because he believes in right and wrong. It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken by them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong, but they're not a matter of mere taste and opinion and more like a multiplication table. So here's the reality. If you believe racism is wrong, if you're an atheist, shut up. Because what he's saying is, if your biology and chemistry, you're just responding to the biological response that you are. You're just doing what you evolved to do. So nobody does anything wrong. There is no wrong. There's no such thing as right and wrong. You do what you do, and if you kill somebody, it's just a response to who you were biologically. It's just a response. You can't believe in right and wrong. Murder is not wrong. It's a biological response. Number 5, free will exists. Number 5, free will exists. We get to choose. Science says we get to choose what we do. We make decisions all the time. And then number 6 is human reasoning. Human reasoning says that we're able to reason and make decisions and think about what of Anthony Flew in his book, There is a God, wrote Theology and Falsification. He said this, when I finally came to recognize the existence of God, it was not a paradigm shift because my paradigm remains. We must follow the argument wherever it leads. Sir Fred Hoyle said, the chance that higher life forms might be merged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the material therein. That's essentially what they believe. Now let me give you the biblical perspective. Here's the first one. If I ask you why Jesus came to earth, most people would say to forgive me of sins. We know that's not complete. Jesus came to give us life and life more abundantly. But there's another reason Jesus came, equally as important, and it was to reveal God. Many people say, well, I don't believe in God because nobody's seen him. Yes, they did. They saw God in a bod. His name was Jesus. He said it himself. Look at this. Look at what he says. John 14:9-10. Jesus answered, didn't you know me, or don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe I am in the Father and the Father is in me? Hebrews 1:1 says the Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. God came to earth in the flesh, became creation to say to you, I exist. It's not just the figment of someone's imagination from years before. I am God in a body. And he said, by the way, you know why we believe the resurrection's real and it exists? Because God in a body said it did. Because he died in a tomb and he raised himself from the dead. And he came back to life and walked the planets. And there were people who witnessed him while he was here. See, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist or not. You may not believe in God, but you have to believe in Jesus or you're just plain ignorant. Jesus existed. No one can argue that. There are all kinds of references to existence. Then there's Job. Job had an interaction with God. In Job 38, the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? I love this part, how God words this. Brace yourself like a man. I would be on the ground crying. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? I wasn't around, God. Tell me if you understand who marked off its dimensions. Surely you know. Surely you know. It's incredible. There were eyewitnesses of Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Jacob and Gideon, everyone who was at the baptism of Christ. They all were witnesses when God said, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. Friend, there is a God. He exists. He was seen in the Bible. He was heard from. There is a God. Now, I know if you're here and you're saying, I don't know, I believe there's a God. There's one last thing. Why I know there's a God. Because I experienced him. I've experienced him. Not only are there eyewitnesses from thousands of years ago, not only is there biblical proof, not only is there scientific proof, not only can I look at what you have to believe to be an atheist and say, I just don't believe that. I can sit here and say, I have experienced the creator of the world in my life. Where I was once guilty and ashamed, he brought me life and he brought me peace and he brought me grace and he changed me from the inside out, not because I was so disciplined to change myself, but because of the power of God that came into me and gave me life. I experienced him. And if you're here today, if you're like Thomas Nagel, you will refuse to believe the only reason you came was to prove why you don't believe in the God. But I have to believe the reason you're here today is you believe there is no God, but there's something in you that wants to believe there is a God that exists. You want the truth more than anything, and you're here today because you wanted to hear something that was foundational and firm that you could sit and say, God, if you're real, I want to experience you. I want to experience you. You know what? If you ask God, Pastor Zach's going to come up and he's going to lead you in this. If you ask God, he will be experienced. He said, you have not because I stand at the door and knock. To the one that opens the door, I'll enter. God will not kick in your door. God will woo you. He'll come to you, but he wants you to make the choice to say, God, I believe. Will you stand? Will you stand right now and just say, Father, I don't believe it. God, I don't believe you existed, but if you exist, you'll be able to hear me right now. And if you hear me right now, say this. If you don't believe, you just say this. God, I want to experience you. I want to experience it. Every young person in here, every teenager in here, you have to come to the point where you believe not just because your parents told you, but because you had an experience with God, so that no argument would deceive you. That it takes way more faith to believe he doesn't exist than the faith it takes to believe he does.